The massive spaceship drifted quietly in the vastness of space. Its metallic surface reflected the light of distant stars, glowing faintly in the cold darkness. Inside, the air was tense. The crew of humans had never expected to be in a place like this, surrounded by aliens whose technology and power were far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Yet here they were, deep within the heart of an alien empire, facing the leaders of a species they had only heard about in stories. Commander Alan Carter, leader of the Earth expedition, stood at the front of the large room. His eyes darted nervously between the alien representatives seated before him. These were no ordinary creatures. Their skin shimmered with colors that shifted with every movement, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The princess, the most powerful of them all, sat in the center, her expression unreadable. Alan had never imagined that his mission would bring him to such a moment. He had been trained for diplomacy, for speaking with different species, but nothing had prepared him for the true power of the alien civilization. Now he was facing an ancient ruler, the queen of the alien empire who controlled entire planets with a flick of her hand. Beside her, her daughter, the princess, sat silently, watching the human carefully. The room was filled with the hum of alien technology, an almost calming sound. Yet for Alan, it was impossible to relax. The queen's piercing gaze was fixed on him, and he could feel the weight of her eyes. She was a being of power, authority, and grace, someone who could make or break Earth's future with a single word. "We have heard much about your kind. Human," the queen spoke, her voice like silk, yet carrying an edge of power that made Alan stand taller. "But today we will decide your worth. You have come to our space. You have come to challenge our power. What do you hope to achieve?" Alan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We come in peace," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "We seek an alliance, a partnership between our people. Together we can grow stronger." The queen narrowed her eyes, and the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. "Stronger," she repeated, almost as if testing the word on her tongue. "What can your kind offer that we do not already have?" Alan's mind raced. What could he say to convince her? What could humans offer that would appeal to an alien empire that had stood for centuries? He wasn't sure, but he had to try. "We have knowledge, creativity, and the ability to adapt. Earth may be small, but we have survived against great odds, and we will continue to survive together with you." The princess, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Her eyes locked onto Alan's. "You speak of survival," she said softly, almost to herself. "But do you know what it is like to live in a world where survival means following the rules of your people, obeying without question, never truly living for yourself?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but Alan could hear the deep sadness in it. For a moment, the room was still. The queen's eyes flickered toward her daughter, a sharp look that clearly conveyed disapproval. But the princess didn't seem to care. She continued to watch Alan, her gaze filled with something he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something personal. "I have lived my entire life under the shadow of my mother's expectations," the princess said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Every move I make is watched. Every word I speak is weighed. I am never allowed to be free." She looked away as if ashamed, but then turned her gaze back to Alan. "But I see something in you, human. Something different." Alan felt his heart race. This was unexpected. Why was the princess speaking to him like this? Was she testing him? Or was there something more? "I don't understand," Alan said, his voice low. "What do you mean?" The princess hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "I have been told that humans are unpredictable," she said, "that you are dangerous. But I think there is more to you than that. I think there is a side to your kind that my mother doesn't see, that the Empire doesn't understand." Alan didn't know how to respond to this. The queen's gaze was now fixed on her daughter, and he could see the anger flickering in her eyes. Yet the princess didn't seem to care. She turned back to Alan, her voice now filled with an unexpected determination. "I want to know you better, human," she said, her words strong. "And perhaps I want something more." Alan's mind raced. What was happening? Was this some kind of test? Or was the princess genuinely interested in him? He didn't know, but one thing was clear. The tension in the room had just reached a boiling point. Suddenly, before Alan could speak, the princess added, almost as if she had been holding the words back, "Will you be my Earth Father?" The room fell into complete silence. The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. Alan stared at her, unsure of what to say. What did she mean? Why would the princess ask him such a thing? And in the shadows, the queen, who had been watching all along, now stiffened with fury. What had she just heard? The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Alan stood there frozen as the princess's words echoed in his mind. "Will you be my Earth Father?" The question was unexpected, completely unprepared for. What did she mean by that? Why had she asked him? He searched her eyes, hoping for some clue, some explanation, but all he found was a calm, unyielding look. It was like she knew something he didn't. The queen's gaze had turned from anger to confusion, then back to rage as she looked at her daughter. But the princess remained unfazed, as if this was a conversation she'd been ready to have for a long time. Alan was caught between them, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Was this some kind of trap, or was the princess really asking him something personal, something deeper? The princess broke the silence, her voice softer than before but still strong. "I know this is unexpected, but please hear me out," she said, her eyes not leaving Alan's. "I have lived my whole life in the shadow of expectations. My people, my mother, they all have a vision of who I should be. I am a tool for their power, a symbol for their empire, but I never asked for any of it." Alan was still struggling to comprehend what she was saying. The weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy mist, but they also made sense in a strange way. She was an alien princess surrounded by grandeur and might, yet behind the power, the cold alien technology and the crown of her people, there seemed to be a deep loneliness in her voice. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was younger, I dreamed of being free, of making my own choices, of living for something greater than just following orders. But the Empire doesn't allow for that. My mother, the Queen, she controls everything. She has power, she has influence, but it comes at a cost. And I am the cost." Alan felt a pang of sympathy for the princess. She was royalty, yet she spoke of her life as if it were a prison. He had come here to form an alliance, to find a way to make peace between their worlds. But now he saw something more. The princess wasn't just asking for peace, she was asking for something far deeper. She was asking for freedom. She turned her head, her eyes briefly meeting her mother's cold, piercing stare before she looked back at Alan. "You see," she said, her voice more steady now, "I have never known what it's like to make a real choice, to decide who I am, who I want to be. Every action, every word is dictated by the Empire. The Queen, my mother, expects me to be a perfect ruler, to never show weakness, to never question. But that's not who I am. I am just a girl who wants to be seen for who I truly am." Alan was struck by the vulnerability in her words. He had expected to face an alien empire, a ruthless race of conquerors, but instead he was seeing the heart of a young woman trapped in her royal cage. For the first time he realized the princess's request wasn't just about power or diplomacy. It was personal. She was asking for something far simpler and more profound. "I see," Alan said, his voice softening. "You want a father, someone who doesn't judge you by your title, by your status, but by who you are on the inside." The princess nodded, her eyes locked onto his. "Exactly. I've seen humans. You're different. I've heard your stories. You don't live by the rules of an empire the way we do. You have families, real families, where love and choice matter. I don't have that. I've never had that." She paused for a moment, her face falling slightly. "I've never had someone who cared for me, not just for what I could bring to the throne, but for who I really am." Alan's heart swelled with compassion. He had expected to play a role in an intergalactic negotiation, but now he found himself in the middle of a much more complex situation. The princess wasn't asking for war or conquest. She was asking for something much simpler, something human. She was asking for a connection, for a father, for a sense of belonging. He didn't know how to respond at first. This wasn't a question he was prepared for, but it was also a question he couldn't ignore. The princess wasn't just an alien monarch. She was someone who felt the same isolation, the same desire for acceptance that so many people on Earth felt. "I don't know if I can be the father you're asking for," Alan admitted, his voice steady but unsure. "I'm a human, not an alien. I don't know the first thing about ruling an empire or understanding your culture, but I do know what it's like to be lonely, to feel like you don't belong, and I think that at least in that way I can understand you." The princess's face softened, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. For the first time in the conversation, she looked relieved. "That's all I'm asking for," she said quietly. "Not to be a princess, not to be the future of an empire, but just to be me. And I need someone to help me discover who that is. Someone who isn't afraid to see the real me, not just the image of power that I'm forced to portray." As the words settled between them, Alan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. The princess had opened up to him in a way no one had expected. And now, as the silence stretched between them, Alan realized that his next move could change everything, not just for him, but for the future of both their worlds. The queen, still watching from her seat, remained silent, her face hard and unreadable. But Alan could feel the tension rising. The princess had said too much. Would the queen allow this betrayal to go unpunished? Would she allow her daughter to seek a human connection? Alan wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. The path ahead was dangerous, and neither he nor the princess knew what consequences awaited them. The tension in the room thickened as the princess's last words hung in the air. Alan could feel it, a sharp, icy sensation pressing against him. He wasn't sure if it was the queen's anger or the weight of the princess's request that was making the atmosphere so heavy. But it was clear. This moment would change everything. The queen's eyes, cold and calculating, never left her daughter. There was a fire in them now, but it wasn't one of warmth or understanding. It was the fire of a ruler betrayed, a mother scorned. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines, the faint pulse of alien machinery that now seemed to vibrate with tension. Finally, the queen spoke, her voice low but filled with authority. "You speak of feelings, of freedom, of desires," she began, each word like a slow, deliberate strike. "But you forget that you are the princess of the empire, the heir to the throne. Your duty is to the empire, to your people. You are not free to make choices based on your whims." The princess's face stiffened, her defiance rising to meet her mother's harsh words. "I never wanted this, mother," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I never asked to be a puppet, controlled by the empire's expectations. I want to be more than just a symbol of power. I want to make my own choices, live my own life. Enough." The queen's voice cracked like a whip, echoing through the grand chamber. "You will never be free of your duty, and you will never be free of me. You were born into this, your position, your title, your destiny. It is not yours to throw away. It is the empire's, and it is mine." The princess flinched at the harsh words, but her eyes burned with an inner fire. "Then I choose something else. I choose a human, someone who understands what it means to be free, to have a life of your own, without the weight of an entire empire on your shoulders." The queen's gaze turned to Alan, her eyes narrowing with a coldness that made the air seem even colder. "You," she said with disdain, as if the very idea of a human being involved in the royal matters of her empire was an insult. "You think that you, a mere human, can be a part of my daughter's life? You who come from a species that is nothing more than a passing blip in the grand timeline of the galaxy?" Alan stood tall, meeting the queen's cold glare. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had come here to negotiate, to bring peace, and now he realized that peace was not the only thing at stake. The future of the princess, and possibly the future of Earth's relations with this empire, hung in the balance. "I don't know if I can be the father your daughter wants." "Queen," Alan said, his voice calm but firm, "but I can't stand by and let her be treated like this. She deserves more than to be controlled by the rules of your empire. She deserves a chance to live for herself, to find her own path." The queen's eyes flashed with fury. She stood from her throne with a sudden, sharp motion, her robe sweeping behind her like the wings of an ancient bird of prey. The room seemed to shrink in the face of her presence. "You speak of freedom, human," she said with venom. "But what do you know of freedom? You live in a world ruled by chaos, by petty conflict. My empire is built on order, on power, on control. You are nothing more than a fleeting shadow in the dark. You will never have what it takes to rule, to understand true strength." The princess stepped forward, her chin high, her posture defiant. "I don't want to rule, mother," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to be free. I want a life outside of your control. I want to be seen as something more than just a piece of your empire." The queen's eyes narrowed to slits. "You think you can leave, that you can abandon your destiny? You will regret this, my daughter. I will not allow a human to take your place, to replace the empire's legacy with his weak, flawed world." The tension in the room was unbearable. Alan could see the princess's resolve faltering slightly, the weight of her mother's words sinking in. She had never stood against the queen like this. The empire had always come first. Her mother's word had always been the law. But now for the first time the princess was choosing something else, something human. "You do not know what you ask," the queen said, her voice now eerily calm. "But I will teach you. I will make sure you understand. And if you think you can escape me, you are gravely mistaken." The queen turned to her guards and the atmosphere shifted. The coldness in her voice was replaced by an edge of command. "Take her to the holding chambers," she ordered. "We will speak no more of this foolishness." The guards stepped forward, their heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. The princess looked at Alan one last time, her face a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I'm sorry," she whispered, almost to herself, as the guards seized her wrists. "I never wanted to disappoint you, but I have no choice." Alan's heart sank as he watched the princess being dragged away, but he knew that this wasn't over. It couldn't be. He had come here to negotiate peace, but now he had to do more than that. He had to protect the princess. And perhaps in doing so, he would protect the future of both their worlds. The queen turned to Alan, her gaze cold and final. "You should leave, human," she said, "before things get worse." But Alan didn't move. He wasn't leaving without the princess, not now. Not after everything he had just learned. "Not until I've made sure she's safe," he said, his voice steady. The queen's lips curled into a cold smile. "You will regret this," she whispered, and with that, the game had changed. The corridors of the alien ship were vast, lined with shimmering panels and flickering lights that seemed to pulse with life. Alan walked briskly, his mind racing. The events of the past few hours had been a whirlwind of tension, conflict, and revelations. The princess's plea had shaken him more than he'd like to admit. And now he was caught between the duty he'd been sent here to fulfill and his growing concern for the alien princess's fate. He had hoped that this mission would be about diplomacy, about finding a way to foster peace between Earth and the alien empire. But now it had become something far more complicated. He had witnessed firsthand the immense power the queen wielded, and the lengths she was willing to go to in order to maintain control over her daughter. Alan had no illusions about the situation. The queen wasn't someone who could be easily swayed. She wasn't just a mother upset by a rebellious daughter. She was a ruler, a monarch who commanded the respect of an entire empire. And she would stop at nothing to ensure that her legacy and her control over the princess remained intact. Yet the princess's words had left a mark on him. She had opened up to him in a way no one had expected. It wasn't just a political alliance she was seeking. It was a personal one. She wasn't asking for power or influence, she was asking for freedom. And that, more than anything, resonated with Alan. He couldn't just walk away now, not when he knew how trapped she felt. As he walked through the corridors, Alan's mind returned to the queen's words. "You will regret this," she had said, her voice filled with icy certainty. He could almost feel the weight of her threat bearing down on him. He had no doubt that the queen would go to great lengths to stop him from interfering further, and the princess would be caught in the middle. Alan turned a corner and found himself in front of the holding chambers. He stopped, taking a deep breath. There was no turning back now. He had to act. If he didn't, the princess's future, and perhaps the future of any meaningful alliance between their worlds, would be lost. But as he stood there, ready to confront whatever came next, a sense of doubt crept into his mind. Could he really change anything here? He wasn't a soldier, not really. He wasn't prepared for a fight against an empire this powerful. He had been trained in diplomacy, in negotiation, but he had never been trained to stand against a queen like this. And yet, as the image of the princess flashed before his eyes, he knew he couldn't leave her to face the queen alone. He couldn't let the queen's cruelty continue. Alan had already seen the toll it had taken on the princess. She had been raised to believe that her only worth was in what she could do for the empire. For her mother, she had never been allowed to have a voice of her own, never been allowed to choose her own path. And now, when she had finally taken a step toward independence, she was being punished for it. Alan stepped forward, his hand resting on the door handle to the holding chamber. He wasn't sure what he would face inside, whether the guards would stop him, whether the queen would be there waiting for him, or whether the princess would even want his help. But one thing was certain. If he didn't do something now, it would be too late. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with the soft hum of alien technology. The princess was sitting on a bench near the far wall, her head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't look up when he entered, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her body was hunched as though she were trying to make herself as small as possible. "Princess," Alan said softly, stepping closer. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Commander," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I never wanted to drag you into this mess." Alan shook his head. "No, Princess. You didn't drag me into anything. I came here because I believed in peace and the idea of working together. But now, seeing what you're going through, I can't just walk away. I can't leave you to face this alone." The princess looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "But you don't understand. My mother, she will never forgive me for this. She will never let me go. I am her heir, and she will do everything in her power to keep me under her control." "I know," Alan said, his voice steady, "but I won't let that happen. I'll help you. We can figure something out. We don't have to go through this alone." For a moment, the princess said nothing. Then she stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't understand the power she has," she said quietly. "The queen controls everything. Not just the empire, but everyone in it. If I stand against her, I could lose everything, my title, my family, everything I've ever known. And I'll be alone with nothing." Alan felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. He had no way of truly understanding the weight of her world, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The princess had always been in the shadows of something far greater than herself, and now that she was reaching for freedom, she was facing the consequences. "You don't have to be alone," Alan said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to carry this burden alone." The princess's eyes softened, a faint glimmer of hope in them. "But how can we fight the queen? How can we stand against her when she has all the power?" Alan took a step closer, his expression serious. "We don't need to fight her with force. We fight her with unity. The empire may be powerful, but it's built on the support of its people. We can gather allies, find those who believe in your vision. Together we can change things." The princess looked at him for a long moment, as if considering his words. Then with a deep breath, she nodded. "You're right. I can't do this alone. But with your help, maybe there's a chance." Alan knew that their path ahead would not be easy. They would face challenges, danger, and opposition. But for the first time, he saw a spark of hope in the princess's eyes. And that made it all worth it. The dim metallic walls of the holding chamber felt colder than usual, as Alan and the princess stood in the quiet after their conversation. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. Two individuals from different worlds standing on the brink of something far greater than either could fully understand. Yet in that silence, an idea began to form in the princess's mind, one that would shake the foundations of everything they knew. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant but steady. "If I'm to have any chance of freedom, of living my life on my terms, it can't be done through rebellion alone. I need to change the very system that holds me captive." Alan looked at her, the lines of worry etched across his face. "What do you mean?" "The queen won't just let you go." "You've seen what she's capable of." The princess nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I know, but the Empire's power isn't as solid as she thinks. There are factions within the Empire, those who are disillusioned with the Queen's rule, who seek a new direction. If I could gain their support, if I could offer them something they truly want, maybe I could shift the balance." Alan furrowed his brow. "You want to form a rebellion? To fight the Queen?" The princess shook her head quickly. "Not exactly. A rebellion would only lead to bloodshed. No, what I'm proposing is something far more dangerous for the Queen. I want to form an alliance between the human race and the people of my empire." Alan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected such a bold suggestion. "An alliance?" he repeated, trying to process what she was saying. "But the Queen, she'll never allow it. A human alliance would undermine her authority." "I know," the princess said softly, "but that's exactly why it could work. If I can show the Empire that the humans are valuable allies, if we can prove that we have something to offer in terms of knowledge, technology, and resources, It might just be enough to sway those who are dissatisfied with her reign. Alan felt a rising sense of both excitement and fear. This was a risky move, one that could change everything, not just for the princess, but for the future of Earth as well. You're saying that by forming this alliance, you can bring people over to your side. But how does that help you? How does that get you free from your mother's grasp? The princess's eyes gleamed with a mix of hope and calculation. The queen's power is built on control and fear. If we can offer something more, something the empire needs, she won't be able to ignore it. This alliance could bring peace, prosperity, and a new future for both humans and my people. If I can gather enough support, she won't be able to stop me. Alan was silent for a moment, considering the enormity of what she was proposing. The fate of two worlds was suddenly in his hands, and as the weight of the decision bore down on him, a sense of duty stirred within him. He had always believed in the potential of humanity, in their ability to rise above challenges, but now, standing here with the princess, he realized how much more was at stake. "We don't have much time," Alan said at last, his voice firm. "If we're going to pull this off, we'll need allies, and we'll need them quickly. But the queen isn't going to sit by and watch us build a rebellion or an alliance. She'll strike first." The princess nodded grimly. "I know, but we have something the queen can't ignore. The humans have strength, resilience, and, more importantly, humanity. The people of my empire are desperate for change. They are tired of the queen's iron grip on their lives. We can offer them a different way." Alan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the plan. An alliance with the princess could be the key to unlocking peace, but it would require careful maneuvering. The queen would not let this happen without a fight, and the princess's plan carried risks that could endanger them all. "All right," Alan said, his voice resolute. "We'll start reaching out to the factions within your empire. We'll find those who want change, those who want peace, and we'll build an alliance from there. But you need to be careful, princess. You're walking a dangerous line. If the queen finds out what we're doing—" "I know," the princess interrupted. "I'm not naive. But if I don't do this, I'll never have the chance to live for myself, and I won't be able to help my people." Alan studied her for a long moment. There was something about her, something more than the title of princess or heir to an empire. She was someone who genuinely cared for the future, not just her own, but the future of both her people and his. In that moment, he made a decision. He would help her no matter the cost. "We'll do this together," Alan said firmly, his voice unwavering. "We'll build this alliance and we'll make sure it works. But you have to trust me. We can't afford to make mistakes." The princess smiled faintly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I do trust you, Commander. More than you know." But as the words left her lips, the door to the chamber suddenly opened. Alan turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side. Two of the queen's guards stood in the doorway, their armor gleaming in the dim light, their expressions unreadable. "The queen demands your presence," one of them said, his voice low and emotionless. The princess stood still, her heart racing. Alan could see the fear in her eyes, but she didn't show it. She was determined to follow through with the plan, no matter the consequences. "I will go," she said quietly, her voice firm. "But this isn't over. We will build this alliance and we will change everything." Alan nodded, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what they were about to face. This was only the beginning. The heavy silence in the holding chamber hung like a cloud as the princess and Alan walked side by side toward the queen's royal quarters. The guards' footsteps echoed behind them, reminding Alan that this was no ordinary mission. They were not just seeking a peaceful resolution anymore. The stakes had risen, and the queen's intentions had become clear. She would stop at nothing to maintain control, even if it meant destroying everything her daughter had ever hoped for. Alan could sense the tension radiating from the princess. Her back was straight, her expression resolute, but there was a subtle quiver in her voice as she spoke. "I don't know what my mother will do," she said quietly, almost to herself. "She's always had a way of making people doubt their own choices. She'll try to convince me that this alliance is a mistake, that I'm betraying everything I've been trained for." Alan turned his head slightly to look at her, his gaze filled with understanding. She's used to control. She's used to getting her way. But what you're proposing, that's a threat to her. You're asking for change, for freedom, for something more than just power and dominance, and she won't let that go easily. The princess nodded, her eyes narrowed with determination. "I know, but I won't let her stop me. I can't live in her shadow forever." As they reached the grand doors of the Queen's chambers, Alan could feel the weight of the moment. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The fate of the princess, and perhaps the future of the galaxy, was about to be decided in this very room. The guard stopped in front of the door, giving them both a final stern look before stepping back to allow them entry. The Queen's chambers were as imposing as the woman herself. High vaulted ceilings and walls adorned with alien tapestries that shimmered with an eerie light. The Queen stood at the far end of the room, her back to them, gazing out of a large window that overlooked the dark expanse of space. The princess's heart raced, but she stood tall, determined to face her mother head-on. "Mother," the princess said, her voice calm but firm, "I'm here to talk. I have made my decision." The Queen turned slowly, her eyes locking onto her daughters. There was no warmth in her gaze, only cold calculation. "So you have," she said with a smirk. "And I imagine you think I'll just stand by and watch you throw away your future, your title, your legacy." Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "You think you can change the very foundation of this empire with a human by your side?" Alan stepped forward, his jaw tight. "The princess is asking for a chance to build something different. We don't need to live under the shadow of the past anymore. The empire can change, and we're offering that chance. A chance for peace, for cooperation, not just control." The Queen's eyes flickered with something dark, something dangerous. She walked toward them, her steps slow and deliberate. "You think a mere human can change the course of history? You are nothing but a passing moment, a brief speck in the galaxy's timeline. I am the Queen. I control everything." "But not anymore," the princess replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm not your pawn, Mother. I've made my choice." The Queen's expression hardened, and for a moment it seemed as if time stood still. Then her lips curled into a sinister smile. "You're wrong, my dear. You've never had a choice." Without warning, the Queen's voice rose in a sharp, commanding tone. "Guards!" The room seemed to explode into motion. The doors burst open and 24 heavily armed guards flooded into the chamber, surrounding Alan and the princess. Their armor gleamed under the artificial lighting, their weapons ready. The princess's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. "Mother, what are you doing? I'm not a child anymore. I won't be controlled like this." The Queen's face twisted into an expression of cold fury. "You are my daughter, and you will do as I say. This foolish rebellion, this alliance with the humans is a threat to everything I have built. You will learn that your choices have consequences." Alan's hand instinctively moved to the side where his blaster was holstered. But the guards were too close, their weapons trained on him and the princess. He knew they couldn't fight their way out, not with so many armed against them. The Queen had set this trap with precision. "I've given you every chance, daughter," the Queen continued, her voice dripping with venom. "But this foolishness ends now. Guards, take them to the holding cells. They will both be confined until further notice." The princess's heart sank, but she refused to show any fear. "You can lock us up, Mother, but you can't take away my future. I'm leaving this empire, and I'm doing it with or without your permission." The Queen's laugh was low and menacing. "You think you can just leave? You think you can walk away from everything I've built? You think a human can offer you something I can't?" Alan stepped forward, trying to keep the tension at bay. "This isn't about taking something away from you. It's about giving something back to the people. They need a choice, a voice. If you don't let them have that, it will be your downfall." The Queen's eyes burned with fury, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she motioned to the guards, signaling them to take action. "You'll regret this," the Queen hissed as the guards moved forward. But the princess didn't flinch. She stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. She knew the Queen would stop at nothing to maintain control, but she also knew that she couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. Just as the guards reached for them, Alan locked eyes with the princess, his gaze filled with determination. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. "Remember what we talked about," Alan whispered to her. "We'll find a way, together." The princess nodded slightly, her heart steady. She had chosen this path, and she would not let her mother's cruelty stand in her way. Even if it meant facing the Queen's wrath head-on, she was ready. And so as the guards closed in, a new kind of resolve settled over the princess. She wasn't just fighting for her future. She was fighting for something far more important, the future of her people, and the chance for humanity to play a role in the galaxy's next chapter. The cold walls of the holding cells seemed to press in from every side. their metallic surfaces reflecting the harsh, unforgiving light that illuminated the room. The princess stood by the bars, staring into the darkness beyond, her thoughts racing. It had been hours since the queen's last command, hours since Alan and the princess were separated by guards and locked away in different parts of the ship. The princess's mind was a battlefield, torn between the duty she had been born into and the life she now yearned for. Freedom, change, and a future that wasn't defined by her mother's iron will. The queen's wrath had always been something to fear, but now, faced with the harsh reality of her mother's power, the princess knew that fear alone would not be enough to stop her. What was the point of power if it came with a life of misery? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each passing moment. The princess's heart leapt in her chest, and she knew without turning around that it was Alan. His presence had a calming effect on her, one that grounded her in the middle of the storm swirling around them. He had been a constant, someone who believed in her even when she had begun to doubt herself. The guards outside her cell shifted, their heavy boots scraping against the floor as they took their positions. Alan appeared in front of the cell, his face serious but filled with resolve. "I've been speaking to some of the other factions within the Empire," he said quietly, his voice low but determined. "There's support for your vision, Princess. They're tired of the Queen's rule. They want change." The princess's eyes brightened, a flicker of hope sparking within her. "You really think they'll back me?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "After everything that's happened? After the Queen?" Alan nodded firmly, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, the Queen's hold on this empire is built on fear, but fear isn't everything. There are people here who see the truth, who want something different. They've been waiting for someone like you to show them a way forward." The princess felt a rush of emotion, relief, joy, but also a deep sense of responsibility. She had wanted change, but now she could see the weight of it. To be a symbol of hope was a burden, but it was also a chance to rewrite her people's future. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all those who had been silenced for far too long. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," the princess admitted, her voice quieter now. "I've spent my whole life being controlled by her. I've never known what it's like to make a decision for myself. And now I'm supposed to lead a rebellion, to tear down everything my mother has built." Alan's eyes softened. "You don't have to do it alone. You have allies, and most importantly, you have the strength to do this. You're not your mother. You don't have to rule with fear. You can rule with compassion." Her chest tightened at his words. "But what if I fail? What if I can't live up to what they expect of me? I've never wanted to be like my mother, but can I truly be different?" "You don't have to be perfect," Alan replied, taking a step closer to the bars. "You just need to be true to yourself. Lead with your heart, not with the weight of expectations." The princess felt a sense of calm wash over her as she looked at Alan. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could take control of her destiny. The weight of her title had always felt like a chain around her neck, pulling her in directions she had no desire to go. But now, it was as if that chain was breaking piece by piece with every word of encouragement Alan spoke. But even as her resolve hardened, a new wave of doubt crept in. "What about my mother? What will she do if I leave? She won't just let me go. She'll fight." Alan interrupted gently, understanding the fear in her eyes. "But that's something we can't control. What we can control is what happens next. You have the power to choose. It's your decision now." The princess's heart raced as she thought about the Queen. Her mother had always been an immovable force in her life, a constant reminder of the Empire's expectations. But now the thought of standing against the Queen didn't seem as impossible as it once had. She had already taken the first step by refusing to be controlled. This was the next step, the hardest one. "I have to make a choice," the princess said softly, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I can either stay in my mother's shadow and live a life of fear and obligation, or I can choose to live for myself. Choose a future that I believe in, no matter what the consequences." Alan's eyes shone with pride. "And I'll be right here helping you every step of the way." For the first time, the princess smiled. It wasn't a smile of uncertainty or doubt, it was a smile of determination, of clarity. "Then let's do this." She stepped toward the bars of the cell, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold metal. "Release me, Alan, I'm ready." He nodded, a sense of purpose settling over him. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The princess was no longer the scared girl she once was. She had found her voice and with it the courage to take the reins of her own future. As the guards unlocked the cell, Alan and the princess exchanged a final look, one filled with unspoken understanding. This was the moment that would change everything. The future of the Empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself, would hinge on the choices they made in the next few days. But for now, they had made the most important choice of all. They were no longer bound by the chains of the past. They were stepping into the unknown together, ready to fight for a future that was truly theirs to shape. And with that, the door to the holding cell opened and the princess walked out, no longer a captive of her mother's reign, but a leader of her own destiny.